Hey guys, Alex here from the DMs Club on the Titan Bear Gaming YouTube channel. I'm continuing to go through Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and today I'm focusing on the new Warlock Patrons. If you'd like to follow along, this starts on page 53 of Xanathar's Guide. And just like all the other classes, the first couple of sections are talking about ways to distinguish your Warlock in the game and ways that you can help give them a little bit more character. The first thing they talk about is your patron's attitude, and ultimately your attitude towards your patron. You could have a perfectly consensual agreement where you like your patron likes you, and you both act in your mutual benefit. But what if you don't like your patron? What if you are begrudgingly entered into this contract, or the patron has been begrudgingly entered into the contract? What if one of you tricked the other one? These are the kinds of things that you should think about when you're coming up with your Warlock idea. The next section is special terms of the pact. This basically indicates a couple of things that you might need to do in order to satisfy your patron. Now, the ones that they suggest are a little bit silly, they're a little bit stupid, but it's not a bad thing to think about. The ones that they suggest are things like you are required to abstain from alcohol or other intoxicants as a test to your willpower. Once a day, you must inscribe or carve your patron's name or symbol on a wall of the building. You must occasionally conduct bizarre rituals to maintain your pact. It's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how much I like any of the specific examples that they give here, but it's a good thing to think about in terms of how you can bring a level of realism and ultimately believability to your character in the game. You've cut a pact with some kind of otherworldly creature, some kind of huge, powerful demon or an angel or a god potentially, and that should have some kind of impact on your daily life. Think about how that should actually manifest. What kind of ritual you might want to have in order to actually exemplify this pact. The last thing they talk about is the binding mark, and this is the one that gets a little bit silly. This one talks about how a physical manifestation of your pact may show up on your body, something that could be readily recognized by an informed observer. It's an interesting idea. I think this one is entirely optional. I don't think you'd have to require this kind of thing to be in any kind of warlock that you are making, but it's definitely something that's interesting to think about, especially if you can think of something that you actually like, something that seems cool, a facial marking or something on your hands or something along those lines. So let's talk about the new patrons that we have for the Warlock. The first one is the Celestial, and the second one is the Hexblade. And just like for the Sorcerer, as well as for the Paladin, they both kind of operate with an interesting dark and light duality that seems to be pretty common here in Xanathar's Guide. So let's talk about the Celestial first. The Celestial, you've basically taken your patron as some kind of powerful resident in the upper planes, the good aligned planes. It could be a unicorn, it could be an angel, it could be something along these lines. The first thing you get for having a Celestial patron is your expanded spell list, just like any of the other patrons. And you do get some interesting spells for this that all kind of help meld you over into more of the cleric direction, just like for the Divine Soul for the Sorcerer that we just talked about. You get some cool spells like Cure Wounds, Guiding Bolt, Lesser Restoration, Revivify as a 3rd level spell, Guardian of Faith, Greater Restoration, things like this. Healing and restoration spells. Otherwise, they would normally be outside of the forte of the Warlock. Now you have access to them. At 1st level, you pick up the bonus cantrips of Light and Sacred Flame that don't count against your normal Warlock cantrip count, so that's great. Those are two really powerful ones that most clerics or some other kind of religious-oriented caster end up taking, because those are some of the best cantrips available to divine casters. You also get the Healing Light power at 1st level. This one is vaguely reminiscent of the Balm of the Summer Court power that we have for the Circle of Dreams Druid in an earlier section of Xanathar's Guide. This basically gives you a pool of hit points, pool of dice that you can roll to recover health for yourself or your allies. Think of it as being something similar to Lay on Hands, but you can do it from range, and it's not just a fixed hit point pool. It does operate with this D6s quantity. You get 1 plus your Warlock level of D6s. It's important to have the 1 plus because you do get this at level 1, so you get it pretty early in the game. And you can, I think it says that you can expend a maximum of your charisma modifier at a time. Yeah, that's right. But you do get to do this as a power just as a bonus action, so that's pretty good. Starting at 6th level, you pick up Radiant Soul, which is a very cool power. You get resistance to radiant damage, since radiant damage and energy is kind of your bloodline, it's kind of your forte, it makes a level of sense. As well as anytime that you cast a spell that deals radiant or fire damage, you can add your charisma modifier to 1 radiant or fire damage roll of that spell against one of its targets. Forgetting the stipulations for only being able to channel this thing one time, you basically get to add your charisma modifier to any of the radiant damage or fire damage rolls that you're doing, which is really good. That's a big power. This is a fairly common thing that you can find elsewhere within the 5th edition rule set, but getting this at 6th level is nice and early, so you'll get a lot of benefit from this one. Starting at 10th level, you get another very cool power called Celestial Resilience, which is that whenever you take a short or a long rest, you recover some temporary hit points, and it's equal to your Warlock level plus your charisma modifier, which could actually sum up pretty good. In the very beginning of the game, you can get 4, 5, 6 points, and by the time you're reaching up to level 10 or 15, you're recovering almost 20 temporary hit points every time you take a short rest. That's huge. You're basically increasing your overall hit point total. What's more is, additionally, you choose up to 5 creatures you can see at the end of the rest, and those creatures each gain temporary hit points equal to half your Warlock level plus your charisma modifier. So that's a lot of general healing, a lot of health buffer that you can spread to your friends for nothing other than simply having the power. This is a big one. I like this one a lot. At 14th level, you pick up an interesting power called Searing Vengeance, which is basically if you die or you get close to death, you can explode in a searing fireball and blind creatures around you. The details are kind of cool. When you have to make a death save at the start of your turn, you can instead spring back to your feet with a burst of radiant energy. You regain hit points equal to half of your hit point maximum. Cool, so it picks you up pretty hard too. As well as you can stand up if you choose. Each creature within 30 feet takes a radiant damage equal to 2d8 plus your charisma modifier and is blinded until the end of your turn. You can't use it again until you finish a long rest. That's pretty big. I think we've seen this kind of thing happen for one of the magic items that Pike was using on Critical Role, where she went down and then did this crazy radiant burst and did a whole bunch of damage. It's a cool power. Having this kind of reactive thing upon death is kind of a fun one. I think the players will like this one a lot. So I think the Celestial Patron is an interesting one. I think that there's a lot of cool powers that you get with it. There's definitely a level of meat in terms of the mechanical bonuses that you get for a Celestial Warlock. I find it a little bit tough that just like the rest of the patron spells, you only get these new spells added to the list. You don't automatically know them, which I find to be a little bit tough, but I think that's just within the normal wheelhouse of the Warlock anyway. You have to be very particular about which spells you're going to select. So you have to basically compete now for your normal Warlock spells versus these curing spells and restoration spells, which I think is a little bit tough. I kind of would rather that it would just be an addition, but you know what? We'll see what happens. Otherwise, I really like the Celestial. The second patron that we have is the Hexblade. This one is interesting, whereas the Celestial came from the upper planes and some kind of deific creature or some kind of benevolent creature. The Hexblade is really specific. It is originated from the Shadowfell and is supposed to be that you are making a pact with some kind of crazy, powerful, evil relic weapon that has some monstrous sentience that you can talk to, and it can seek you out on different planes of existence and things like that. Yeah, you're talking to a sword or a gun or something else along these lines, and it's not good. It's not a nice weapon. I think most weapons aren't particularly nice, given their general purpose, but that's what the thematic idea behind the Hexblade is. You get some really cool powers with it that I think are going to tempt a lot of players, so let's take a look at what those are. Your expanded spell list that you get is all very appropriate for if you're going to be a blade lock, a blade-oriented warlock. It's all offensive weapon-based, or it's defensive health, damage mitigation, armor class, etc. oriented. You get Wrathful Smite, Branding Smite, Elemental Weapon, Banishing Smite, so you get a bunch of the Paladin Smite spells. Pretty sweet. Shield, Blur, Blink, Stagger, and Cone of Cold. Some cool stuff, helps you improve your defenses as well as helping to control the battlefield a little bit. So it's nice. It kind of gives you this magical warrior idea, which I think works out pretty well for this. At first level, you pick up Hexblade's Curse, and this is kind of your new main mechanic that you're going to be operating with as a Hexblade Warlock. The way that it works is, as a bonus action, you choose a creature that you can see and you curse them for a minute. You get some really serious combat benefits against when you're fighting the target of your Hexblade's Curse. You get a bonus to damage rolls against the target equal to your proficiency bonus, which is basically the same as the rage bonus to damage that you get as a barbarian. So that's huge. That's very high impact. Any attack roll that you make against the cursed target is a crit on a 19 or a 20 instead of just a 20. So you have double your critical hit chance, which is pretty sweet. Further, if the target dies, you regain some hit points when it goes down, and it's equal to your warlock level plus your charisma modifier, which is not a small amount either. You can't use this feature again until you finish a short or long rest, but you're basically throwing this thing out once per combat, and you're going to go out and you're going to murder some fools with this power. Also, at first level, you pick up the Hex Warrior power, which gives you some nice proficiencies. You get medium armor and shields, which is going to be big for your D8 stature that you're otherwise operating with. That's kind of a big deal. And you also pick up proficiency with martial weapons. This basically gives you the option, if you're going to go for something other than Pact of the Blade, you still get martial weapon proficiency, because if you remember, Pact of the Blade grants you proficiency in whatever the type of weapon your Pact Blade is. This would give you the option to go some of the other pacts if you wanted to go with the Hexblade Patron anyway. It's kind of an interesting level of freedom for this one. You also get the ability to abandon needing to use strength or dexterity as your attack and damage modifier for your weapon attacks with the Hex Warrior from the Hexblade Patron. You instead get to just use your charisma modifier as your weapon attack modifier. So that means that applies to your charisma, applies to your attack rolls as well as to your damage rolls. That's huge. That helps you to centralize your stats on your charisma as well as then whatever other kind of mental or defensive stats you want, instead of having to separate out charisma and strength or charisma and dexterity from an offensive perspective. So that's pretty big. That one also, it says that it explicitly extends to the Pact of the Blade feature should you take Pact of the Blade, so it's supposed to apply for both cases. At 6th level, you also get a really cool power called Accursed Spectre. Now this one operates very similarly to the Sign of Ill Omen power that we have for the Shadow Sorcerer, where they were summoning a Hound of Ill Omen. Basically, in this case, when you slay a humanoid, you can cause its spirit to rise from its corpse as a specter using the specter stats that are available in the monster manual. When the Spectre appears, it gains temporary hit points equal to half your Warlock level, which is good because Spectres have low HPs in general. You roll initiative, it has its own turns, and it obeys your verbal commands, as well as gaining a special bonus to its attack rolls equal to your charisma modifier, so that it's got a little bit more of a chance of actually doing damage in combat. It remains in your service until the end of your next long rest, at which point it vanishes into the afterlife. Now, like with most summons, the stat block of the creature that you're summoning makes a really big difference, but the Spectre is going to be really useful no matter what. It's on page 279 of the monster manual. It's only got 22 hit points, but that's where having a little bit of a hit point buffer from the power comes in handy. It can fly 50 feet and around. It's got damage resistance to basically everything that's non-magical, which is really very cool. And it's got damage immunities to necrotic and poison. It's got dark vision and incorporeal movement, so it can move through creatures and objects. It does have sunlight sensitivity, so you're going to have to keep that in mind if you're going to be busting your Spectre out in the middle of broad daylight. But its attack is very cool. It does 10 necrotic damage when it hits, and the target must succeed on a DC 10 con save or have its hit point maximum reduced by an amount equal to the damage taken. So it actually does a lot of damage and can help you whittle down your targets pretty nicely. There's also some other stuff in terms of your Warlock invocations that we'll talk about in a bit that pair off with this. So this is kind of a cool power. Being able to do this every day just by killing something is pretty sweet. Your biggest difference is that you need to be the person that kills the creature, and so you're not going to be able to do it if other people kill it. So that'll limit your ability to get it off, but when you do get it off, I think that you'll like it a lot. At 10th level, we pick up a new power called Armor of Hexes. This one's cool. I like it mostly from being kind of a new unprecedented dice style, a new unprecedented mechanic style, less from the thematic element. The way that it works is if you're the target cursed by your Hexblade curse attacks you and hits you with an attack roll, you can expend your reaction to roll a d6. On a roll of 4 or higher, the attack misses no matter what the original roll was. This one's actually really powerful. It decouples the consequences of the attack from the original attack roll, and instead, if you roll a 4 or higher, that's 4, 5, or 6. That's a 50% chance that the attack will just flat out miss you just for using your reaction. It's cool. There's no other limiters in terms of how many times per day you can try to do this. So you're basically going to want to be doing this almost every turn that you can get away with not using a attack of opportunity. Since it does cost a reaction, there is a bit of an opportunity cost for it. But still, it's a cool dice mechanic. It's a cool power. I like seeing these kinds of new and interesting dice systems. I think people are enjoying rolling dice now in 5th edition. potion. At 14th level, you pick up kind of your last capstone power that you need for being a Hexblade Warlock, which is that if the target of your Hexblade's curse dies, you can just move it to a new target. So that way you don't have to have just a single target be the victim of your curse. If that person then dies, you can move it to the next one and move it to the next one to keep your combat efficiency up. So that's the new Hexblade patron for the Warlock. I think it's cool. I think it's mostly cool because the powers that you get, the mechanics that you get are nice, and I think that they're very high impact. I think people will like using them. The thematic aspect for having a pact with a object, I think doesn't get terribly well translated into the text here. I don't think that your features really do a good job of communicating what that pact is going to look like, having a pact with a sword or having a pact with a gun or something like that. But it's up to the dungeon master and the player to really work together to kind of bring that role play to something that's fruitful and something that's interesting. The powers are here, we just need the role play added to it. Now, Xanathar also provides a couple of additional eldritch invocations that you can choose from, and it's not just for the new patrons that are present here, though the patrons that are present here do get some pretty big benefit out of using this power. For example, we've got one called Eldritch Smite, which needs the Pact of the Blade feature. Once per turn, when you hit a creature with your pact weapon, you can expend a Warlock spell slot to deal an extra 1d8 force damage plus another 1d8 per level of the spell slot. And you can knock the target prone if it's huge or smaller. Really big power. It's going to help make it so that you get a little bit extra oomph out of your weapon attacks being a Pact of the Blade Warlock. Another one that's really good is this improved Pact weapon, also for the Pact of the Blade, where you can give your weapon +1 bonus to its attack and damage rolls, unless it is a magic weapon that already has a bonus to those rolls. Finally, you can also change the weapon type to be something ranged, like a short bow, long bow, light crossbow, or a heavy crossbow. This one's pretty cool. This gives you a nice avenue for adding the equivalent of a magic bonus to your weapons. A lot of the complaints for anybody that's using some kind of class feature weapon is that it kind of pulls them away from the usual quest that heroes and adventurers are on to try to find magic weapons that give them +1 or +2 to their attack and damage rolls. And this just gives you a nice path to achieve that within your class. So this one's good. I like how the player has control over when they can take this, / just having this deliberately built into the game, I think goes a long way. There are a whole bunch of other really cool invocations here, but the last one that I'm going to cover is the one called Maddening Hex. Maddening Hex basically makes it so that you can get a little bit extra damage output, a little bit extra oomph from whenever you're going to cast your Hex ability. When you cast your Hex ability, the target of your Hex, as well as any creature within 5 feet of that Hex, takes psychic damage equal to your Warlock levels. It's pretty cool. It helps to give you a little bit extra damage output and helps you kind of double pump your action economy for that turn. I like that, especially if you're going to be playing one of the Warlock patrons that has this kind of thing. Having this as a passive benefit will go a long way in terms of buffing up your numerical advantage. So those are the new features that we get for the Warlock here in Xanathar's Guide. I like all of it. I'm a pretty big fan of the Warlock class in general. I think that it's a nice, cool addition from 5th edition that helps give a different style of interaction with magic and kind of a different style of interaction with the overarching world. I like the patron idea. I like the fact that we've got kind of this cross lattice of patrons and pacts, and that you can kind of come up with 9 or 15 different kinds of warlocks just by those combinations alone. I like it. I think players are going to like everything that we've got here, and I think you're going to see a lot of warlocks showing up at the table using these things. So let me know what you think of the video. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you're already using some of these. I'm sure some of you are. Tell me some stories. I want to hear them. Otherwise, like the video, subscribe to the channel so you know when I'm releasing some new stuff. I'm going to do Wizard next, and then after that, I think I'm going to start delving into some of the specific sections of Xanathars that aren't class related, but to some of the rules or magic or things like that. So look forward to those videos. Come find me over on social media. I'm at Titan Bear Gaming at basically all major social media outlets. I like to talk about role-playing game stuff there. I'll post different monster stat blocks from products we have in the store. I'll retweet community art or post interesting questions, things that I think are fun or cool that you might want to know about in the RPG community. So come find me over there. Until next time I see you, have more fun, would you? It's good for you.